what I may do now I think what I will do is talk a little bit about RAD. Now, you don't have any slides for this. Oh, Les, what did you do with it? Okay, so here's the thing. We talked about this yesterday. You have one right now coming out. And Frank's even been surprised now, hasn't he? She's been able to prove Frank wrong. Oh, sorry. I know, Frank, I'm sorry. I want you to know when I said that, I had a big smile on my face, Frank. But it's a new client for the firm. So here's the thing. We talked about this yesterday. So we want to build on the Section 8 platform, which has been very successful. It's been much more successful since we've implemented RIP, which was the Rental Housing Integrity Improvement Program. We've instituted EIV. We're now, we've got all these controls. TRAX was a big step in this direction, too. So we've really tightened the program down a lot, but it's been very effective at providing subsidy to tenants and helping them get adequate housing in places where they may not have been able to achieve it, in a way. They've achieved it very different than, say, public housing. And it's more mainstream and generally better maintained and well ran. The next issue for RAD was to leverage private capital to keep the housing stock alive and to provide ongoing availability of low-income housing, which is kind of interesting since just last night I was sitting in the bed and I was reading something, an article from the Drudge Report or something. I don't know what it was. But on that article, it had another article that was embedded in there about referring to low-income housing in Chicago. So I clicked on that and read it. The big dilemma now has been that all this low-income housing has been suffering so severely that the buildings have been abandoned in many cases. And then, of course, who snatches them up? Some of them are actually historic. And these developers have snatched them up and moved all kinds of I would say even SRO. If you guys don't know what SRO means, single room occupancy. It's like studio apartments. And they've been able to rent those out less than 350 square feet for $1,000 a month. And they're all young professionals. So what's happening is they're converting, some of it's on the lakeshore, and they converted all this housing, and they've lost thousands of units of low-income housing across the city. And even the Chicago Housing Authority, the Cook County Housing Authority, they've actually been pretty good about keeping up to date. They've torn down most of their crap, if you will. Cabrini Green I used to live in Chicago, and if you were, some of you who are a little older would remember Cabrini Green, the infamous project of projects. The only people allowed to go there was the mailman, because he delivered the welfare check, and the fire department. Everybody else got shot from this 20-story high-rise. Okay, it was just one big viper's den of crap. It was horrible. They've even torn that down. But here's the problem. Low-income housing is disappearing fast, and public housing is, although not disappearing, it's degrading so fast that they're headed to the same place. So we've actually offered the residents of greater choice and mobility. That's their statement. I don't know if it's really the same protections as public housing. Advocates don't think so. We'll see how it goes, but I think the market needs of the housing stock will outweigh the complaints, because you can keep complaining to keep it the way it is, but you can't live there forever because these buildings need to be rehabbed or rebuilt, and not everybody can afford to do it. The only people that can afford to do it are the private capital people. Congress will not pay any of that. So what they've decided to do is come into this and said, look, we have a couple of programs out here. Our first is public housing, and then we have mod rehab units, and then we had people that were in rent, sup, and wraps, and they're going to convert into two things here. So we're only worried about this right here. The vast majority of these units are here. And you'll notice that in your documents, it says first component, right? All through those documents, it'll say first component. So these are the first component of 60,000 competitive units. The second component units have no cap, but they're all tenant-based vouchers, tenant protection vouchers. So they're based, their availability is based on that. Now, when we come through the conversion, and we're only, like I said, we're focusing here on the left. Client has a choice to go PBV, project-based vouchers, or PBRA, which is HUD Section 8, our normal multifamily process. Everybody who elects PBRA will come into the multifamily model, and they will be subject to 24 CFR Part 5 Subpart H, which is UFERS, which requires audits under the multifamily process. And that's why she was surprised. She said, I've read through this, I can't find it. I said, it doesn't ever say that. They'll use those references, which it was one sentence, wasn't it? We require you to do this. And in fact, we're going to look at the regulatory agreement in a minute just to see differences between what we do now and what RAD will do. So we're going to go through that process. The 60,000 are well underway. The process is just about looking at their annual contributions contract. That's what an ACC is, annual contributions contract. And they have a tenant payment of $318 with a capital fund component and an operating fund component of $474. When they convert over, the tenant payment will stay the same, and HUD, instead of funding it through public housing in these two components, will fund it through the Section 8 program. Now, I've got some other slides coming up here in a minute, but one of the things happening that they start with, and I know you can't see this in the back, there's a RAD web page, which you've gone to. You probably saw this toolkit information. And what the toolkit does is it takes every public housing authority out there, okay, and it takes their last filed financial statement data from the projects, and it puts them into here and allows you to take that last data, if you want to, change some information in it, and it will actually calculate how much, the last line here is the maximum supportable first mortgage. It will actually calculate how much of a mortgage the client or the project can support. So you were looking at who was out there available yesterday. Tim was looking through the list. One of the other things to consider is actually taking some of those, getting the RAD assessment toolkit and having developers. See, if I'm talking to my developer clients, what am I going to do? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to look at these targets of anyone who may be interested. I'm going to run the numbers through the toolkit first because all the numbers are embedded. I can look up any housing authority I want as long as I know the code. I load their numbers, I calculate it, I look at the numbers as to how we may tweak them, and from that they're going to identify partners. That's how I would approach this. Okay? And then they start making calls. Are you interested in doing this? Are you here? Because right now most housing authorities, the only ones who've taken advantage of this are people who had partners already lined up, or somebody came to them early on and they're in the first 60. But most of the housing authorities know about it as a general concept. And I can tell you this because I spent the whole summer doing it. They're not really aware of any details and they don't know how to proceed. So even a small housing authority 150 units, okay? Can be a good development project with a $3 or $4 million mortgage, and you're picking up a nice chunk of change, and you can negotiate on the management of this, because they will go back through the same management process. If they convert to PBRA, they'll go through the same management process that all multifamily projects go through. So you kind of run the numbers, you get down to maximum supportable mortgage, you can tweak the numbers, because a good developer could say, look, I think if we come into here, in fact, if you were to see most of this, this is a snapshot. Think about it like this. You're looking at these project numbers where a lot of fringe is sitting at 150, total comp is 150, 60% of the salary. Well, what's a private management company going to have in those numbers? Now, this is the problem for a lot of folks, is that they think they're going to lose their job and they'll lose their big benefits, and the answer is some of them might. But the housing authority has to be ready to make those choices to keep the housing stock viable, because most of the people who are trying to maintain their benefits are broke anyway. They can't do this. So the toolkit's available. The Notice Everything is out on the RAD webpage. There is a conversion guide that you can download. It's 30, 40 pages, and it talks about process. These slides are based on that process. So what they do is you become familiar with the notice. People can, how to use the planning tool. So the first step is schedule meetings, identify potential lenders. Once they do this, of course, at some stage, they have to have 2 resident meetings. And those meetings are very important. But then again, those same meetings occur if I come in to do a significant rehab, and I'm going to have to relocate people or whatever during that process. The same meetings are occurring. The housing authority has a chance to walk in here and sell them a RAD proposal. And of course, the next thing is for the housing authority to have performed what we call a PCNA, a Project Capital Needs Assessment. Much the same process we do in multifamily. Now it's a GPCNA, a green one. So they have to identify expenditures or other requirements that are required to actually bring this project up to a good condition. And then if they have an existing debt, which most will not, they can retain it. They may have to require project level debt. Now the budgets. They'll be looking at developing an operating budget. So a developer would do most of this based on their own assessment of the current numbers in the development toolkit. They could do a pretty good budget on their own based on what is in the toolkit. Okay? So they can have quite a bit of information available to them as they identify these people and start talking to partners. And of course, historical expenses are in the tool. Then they can begin to tweak the tool for what expenses really will be under the model, or how they see their budget side. Because we all know that budget's driving everything in this particular case, both construction and operations. So it's like tax credits, right? You guys do a ton of tax credits. So those budgets are driving the decision. Now, HUD doesn't care if you use tax credits or don't use tax credits. They have no requirements on what this financing vehicle can be. Put together a deal that suits whatever the process is. On HUD, if you can identify the right partners, HUD will approve it. So a development budget is in place, which you guys are well aware of. PHA sources. Now, by the way, there are some interesting pieces of information here to understand in the handbook. The first year they convert. So let's say I finish, I convert, I got this building redone, and I'm ready to now sign my HAP contract. On the day I sign that HAP contract, it's in March. The rest of that year, you'll be funded from public housing. So you don't actually start your your HAP contract until the first full year under the HAP contract. So that's how we look at sources. So operating funds, capital funds, by the way, they can take funds off they can take reserves on their balance sheets now and apply those into the development process. So they can use other financing sources through HUD or any other tools. Of course, tax credits are certainly available. You guys are well aware of those things. Now, resident process is important, obviously. So as soon as we identify a potential candidate and they kind of agree, hey, we think we're a rad potential, we start having the meetings. We tell them that there's not going to be any additional screening. Trust me, that's extremely important. I had a deal on a PBRA where they were going into tax credits. So they were developing this with a tax credit deal and coming in with a relocation plan because of the significant rehab in the building. They had never managed a Section 8 contract before, and they started asking questions to the residents about their income. And the reason they were asking is to see basically how many of the people would already be, tax credit qualified. The residents heard, "You're reassessing us." And man, hell just came down from heaven above. It was phenomenal. Some resident called the tenant support group or advocacy group, who called the head of the Indiana field office, who put the kibosh to the entire deal immediately. I had to get on the phone with the field office for 2 days and explain the situation and then arrange a meeting for them to go in and meet with the field office. It took me 2 days to get them to agree to a meeting. Of course, then they did the mea culpa, fell on like 6 swords, impaled themselves, and they got over it. But it was a touch-and-go thing. So these things are important and can really hurt the deal. Now, they have some other rights and responsibilities. Minimizing temporary relocation, has in any significant rehab. And then, of course, they have different provisions depending on where they go. And one of those provisions is called choice mobility. And that allows them, if they're not happy under the new Section 8 program, they can take a voucher and leave after 2 years. So the problem is you don't want to have an out-migration of people, and they limit how many people can leave the units under choice mobility. But I think most people hope that what they'll see is the positive side of the facility. Rent's the same, but they get this idea, if you're generational, public housing is your safety net. That's where you live. And going now under the landlord, who's a robber baron, they feel like this is a real change to them, and that's why it's sensitive. Now the team. Okay, there are no scoring factors for the quality of the team, but obviously the better the team, the more likely you are to be approved. So a lot of this is successful mixed finance, where you guys play heavily, your clients play heavily. And they can use $100,000 in public housing funds for pre-development expenses without even getting HUD's approval. So they have some leeway here. Of course, once we get our projections, we go. You do not have to secure a lender or an investor of anything before submitting an application, but you probably should identify your potential team. And the handbook covers quite a bit of that. So revenue neutral, no new funds from HUD. After that, on the Section 8 contract, you get OCAF adjustments, which was where a lot of our HAP contracts are anyway. Rents never decrease. Now the benefit, I'll talk here in a minute, is that the discussion really for the developers is whether they're going to get them into PBRA or Section 8 or they're going to go to the vouchers. They are very much afraid of Section 8 contracts because they don't know tracks. They don't know the process. In fact, they don't know they're going to have a filing under multifamily, right? They didn't know that. And the client really believed none of that was going to happen, but it is going to happen. So there's a big, just like in multifamily where nobody reads the regulatory agreements until you show up. Again, we found that to be the case, right? The client hasn't even read those documents, and they think they know what they're doing, and they don't. But that's kind of why early involvement is particularly important. project they can deal with here. Now, PBV versus Section 8. This is the benefit to the housing authority. They see themselves administering assistance. It has to run through a housing authority. And they get the administrative fees, and they get management fees if the housing authority manages it. They get the fees for managing the project, i.e. the regular scheduled management fees, and they get the housing choice voucher management fees. And there are no REAC inspections. Now, of course, the cons are a lower cap on rents and less potential for debt service. 50% of the units in a particular area can get assistance. And, of course, the need capacity to administer project-based vouchers. They have to have an existing voucher program. I have some housing authorities where the city manages the voucher, and they couldn't even go because they can't manage a voucher program. So, PBRA, of course, you can support a higher rent, and that gives you more debt. All units in the project can be assisted, so it can be 100% assisted. Cons, you have to learn to use tracks. Quite frankly, I don't know why that's a con at all. The software interfaces with tracks. Nobody I know actually runs any kind of, other than the tracks reports, they set their software up and vendors already have the automatic interfaces to communicate to tracks. But they have to get used to doing that. And of course, they are subject to REAC inspections. I had somebody tell me they wouldn't go to Section 8 simply because they were afraid of REAC inspections. So, higher operating costs because the site must do the subsidy calculations. Well, I don't know how that really affects us. Here's the thing in every case. To run a Section 8 program in this world is about 50% cheaper overall, right off the top, than in a housing authority. They're so much faster. The people work faster. They're cheaper. They don't have the benefits. The people just work harder because they're not in the government, right? My problem yesterday with housing authorities are the employees. The housing authority exists for the employees. Well, not in a PBRA. It exists to run a business and to manage the units. So they still have choice mobility. We have a chart here together on just comparisons. And I'll make these slides available to you along with the she can probably go download the document, the conversion guide. She probably has already downloaded that because you download quite a few documents. Okay. Well, you can go back and get the other one, the conversion manual, and maybe the rule. I don't know the way you really want to do all that. I mean, your goal is to talk to some developers, make sure they're aware, because you get to pick up these audits out of here if you can get your clients into them. And contract administration, clearly the project-based voucher. The housing authority is managing that for Section 8. The management agent's doing that. Now, there's no reason the housing authority can't be the management agent. It's just that in most tax credit entities, they would never let the housing authority be the management agent. But in this case, maybe the management agent ownership could be split and shared with the housing authority. Here's my point. It doesn't matter. You can negotiate any deal you want to negotiate to make everybody happy. Okay? So, anyway, of course, lenders are much happier with Section 8 because they see that all the time in their numbers. Now, sure. Yeah, so nothing changes except the units get bigger. I'm not aware of any, you'd have to look at the agreements to see what happened. When they say they added RAD units, I'd be curious to see where the RAD units came from. So they were in part of the initial 60,000, and they got these units approved. The housing authority got these units approved to convert them into the PBRA at the site they were already housing them at anyway. So what they did is instead of, I guess that makes sense, so instead of saying, look, I've got people living in this unit over here, I've got 30 housing authority people living here, and 70 Section 8 contracts, and the owner's just taking my units, and I'm doing all the determination of eligibility. Now they just said, look, let's just convert you to Section 8, and everyone in that unit's Section 8. No addition. Nothing. Not to put it this way, you have more income and stuff like that, more units, but nothing from what you're already doing, because now they come under the HAP contract. Now the question would be this: the HAP contract they had with certain people in the units is a different HAP contract than the one they have now for the RAD units. There are now 2 HAP contracts. And I'm guessing, as we go through the other one here in just a minute, we're probably going to see a particular difference in that the other one probably requires reserve for replacements. It may require some other things that the other HAP contract didn't require. So you may have some differences in compliance areas just simply because one, you now have probably 2 contracts in place, and you need to manage each of them differently. Okay? Even though total Section 8 dollars are Section 8 dollars. Okay? That's what I'd be aware of next. So it gets more fun, right? Now, we tell everybody about residual receipts. If they have a residual receipts requirement, we tell them that might not be fungible. Fungible for them means transferable between entities. So how are we managing all this now? Gosh, why can't I remember why I had this Faircloth thing in here? The Faircloth rule, anyway, was about limiting debt on public housing. And so they're really talking about how to get rid of some of those Faircloth rules and what happens when we do the conversion. But certainly we are defederalizing some of the PHA funds because now under the units we generated under these new units, whatever their requirements are, they can have that money, and the money's theirs. It's not part of the federal program anymore because it's now under a HAP contract, and that money is defederalized. So, agency plan amendment, which we don't really care about, that's for the housing authority. Physical needs assessment to get it done. We have the tool. They look at all this stuff. It's just like any PCNA you do on any multifamily or tax credit project. You look at what's required, come up with the budget. You can see how this is going to go. We manage down to the units again, just like everybody else does, and so we've done all those calculations here. I'm not going to spend too much time here because you guys understand these numbers more than a housing authority. Financing plans. I don't think I need to go through any of this because from a financing side, you guys were already aware of this. And the rest of this is sort of housing authority requirements. What is required? Well, they had to be a standard or high performer under FOS and CMAP. They couldn't have been troubled. So, but actually there are some leeway items around that. HUD can approve a troubled place. I have a troubled one now, 110 units. They're troubled because physical assessment cannot be met. She doesn't have the budget to come out and fix. She's got like 16 frost heaves in the sidewalk. And her issues are mostly cement. The front steps are chipped and spalled. Handrails are loose because the cement's cracked. Well, she doesn't have enough money to do that, so she's troubled. The only way for her to get untroubled at this stage would be to go through RAD, because she'll never save enough money under a capital fund program to actually fix her sites. So there are exceptions to rules. HUD can be motivated to do certain things. Now, Tim, you looked up the list. The next 180 are already pretty much applied for, right?
Looks like it.
So now the rest of these slides, I'm not going to share with you because They're mostly about trying to come to a conclusion about what asset management means under these models. So we would educate the housing authority on what it is to convert to PBRA. Okay? You're already familiar with that. But I guess it helps to do some things here for that. So owner structure, it's going to be in PBRA. It's going to be a single asset entity. It's got its own tax ID number. Now, I think you said Frank didn't think there were going to be audit requirements, right? Well, you wouldn't know what that's going to be until you actually get the subsidy. So in your case, the award would be the amount of the federal subsidy that actually gets utilized ultimately. Well, here's what I say. There's an audit requirement embedded. Okay? 24 CFR Part 5 Subpart H. If you're not over 500, you still have a submission requirement and a financial statement requirement. It's just not audited. You will still file in REAC.
Owner certified.
It's owner certified. Yeah, thanks, Tim. That's what we do now, right? We're under.
You do all the HUD stuff. You just don't have the opinions in the back. All the supplementals are there. Just no opinions.
What did you guys do? Mostly comp or review?
Well, they needed audits.
They needed audits anyway. So in many of these cases, they have tax credit deals that need audits, other stuff too. So from a major program perspective, you would have an audit done. I would still file that owner certified, by the way. That's just how I would handle that. But nevertheless, you have the same requirement now. It's just what's waived. The only thing that can ever be waived would be the audit requirement because you're below $500,000 in subsidy. But if you were to look at, say, the units or the entity now or the project, and you looked at their subsidy, we expect their subsidy to be about the same. So if I went to the toolkit and loaded up a housing authority, they would tell me how much subsidy they're currently getting, and we expect Section 8 to equal that subsidy. So you would sort of know within a ballpark range. Of course, it will all depend on ultimately the calculations of rent and total tenant payment, right, to know. But the requirement's there either way. It just becomes owner certified, as Tim said. This is how complicated some get. Of course, that's not complicated to you. It might still be complicated, but you're used to seeing deals like this with the structure, so that doesn't faze me very much for this conversation. A single asset entity. Of course, we don't have to talk too much about this. Clients, housing authorities need to understand that property, these things, pre-RAD, salaries belong at the project. They will still belong at the project. So for comparison purposes, they're still there. But we say new skill expectations. Oh, sorry, that's a mistype. 50059 instead of a 50058. Possible tax credit rules, waitlist administration, maintenance, no new skills required. In fact, it probably gets easier because the place has been rehabbed. Maintenance, again, we don't have to talk about. Tenant services, insurance is the same. Pilot, they still prefer pilot, but it doesn't really matter. Well, in fact, if you're Section 8, you won't get pilot. Probably because you'll be for-profit. It depends on how they're set up. Vacancy loss. By the way, a lot of the HAP contracts do have vacancy loss requirements in them, or ability to recoup certain vacancy loss items. Management fees, of course, are different. Lady yesterday, or Wednesday, told me in Alabama, I don't know if you've heard this, the Alabama field office has come out and said for new deals, the max they're going to allow on the management fee is like 29 PUM on new deals. And they're in stunned silence. And I have no idea where that's coming from. So Birmingham's just a screwy place right now. They need to close that field office and then drop napalm on it so all traces are gone. It's really weird. So for us, we've told them this client, it was in Macon, and they said, hey, their typical thing is $43. Now, so here's the problem. They're looking at this and saying, I'm dropping a total loaded fee, a property management fee of, say, $43, a bookkeeping fee of $10, asset management fee of another $10, and I've got up to like $72.18 on total management fees achieved, but now I'm only going to get a $43 fee in the Macon market. So how do they make that up? Well, he said, look, this is where you get to retain all your cash flow. So surplus cash is yours. Whereas in these other projects, they can never take anything out. If you build reserves, you keep reserves. That's it. So anyway, first of all, what happens in most of these cases is the management company can do all that for so much cheaper. They don't need $70 to achieve that goal. And of course, people are disappearing at the housing authority, which is what needs to happen also. So reserves, the mortgage payment, whatever. I don't think we have to talk about this too much. Then transition, let me just say this. Handbooks, things we're already aware of. PBRA, tenant selection plan as opposed to their agency plan, and an ACOP. PEP policies applicable, fair housing marketing plan. You can see this. And of course, everybody needs to go through the APPS 2530 process. So most of that is actually stuff you guys are already very well aware of. Your developers are well aware of. The process now is educating the PHA and getting them off the fear-based thing and getting them to move forward. So it's a sales pitch now. So that's where we're kind of moving to in that case. Before we stop on this RAD thing, maybe what I'll do is let's load up your document and just go through the regulatory agreement. I have never gone through one specifically. I've never got it downloaded in time for all the stuff because I'm pretty aware of most of them, and I wanted to just take this chance to go through one now, if you don't mind. See what other things we get out of that. Is this everything? But it was in 7 pieces, right? Or 3 pieces? So it has the HAP contract in it. Yeah. So, let me just see if I can go a wee bit larger. Wow, we're going to have to go smaller. Okay, this one is the first 7 pages. We're really just establishing. Can I go just? Oh, I can't. Statutory authority, the purpose, the scope of the contract, assignability, HUD requirements. 880 is where most of these HAP contract requirements come from. So that's fine. Effective term. Now, January 1, 2014, it shall run for initial term of 20. It's a mandatory 20-year renewal, so it's a 40-year HAP contract. Funding for the remainder of the year, it tells us that that'll come from the public housing program. How many units of bedroom type? Okay, that's great. Provided by the owner, property, necessary services, utilities, exhibits. Owner to accept the flood insurance, applicability, signature page. We're done through the first 7 pages, we will be done here soon. So we got the utility allowance, the contract rent, the gross rent. So we know our GPR right away. A number of rooms in each one. Daily debt service, we had an NA there. The fair housing marketing plan will be attached. Now, section 2. The lease by the owner to eligible low-income families for occupancy by such families. So low-income, the wait list, they'll have a wait list established. Now, see, here's the thing. Now, I have a compliance requirement to establish a wait list. I do not think my other HAP contracts actually do that. You might check. In this case, if the contract calls for a wait list, it might have an objective of fair housing, but if the contract called for the wait list, I might just have to make sure at least they have a wait list. I might not have to test it for all the requirements, but I might have a wait list. I might have to ensure they have the wait list. Okay, utility allowance, resident procedures for grievances, participation, housing and payments to owner, mostly just describing how they're going to get paid. RAD rehab assistance. For any that is vacant during the period of initial repairs, and 2 was receiving payment under the public housing program immediately prior to the effective date, the owner is entitled to receive a monthly RAD rehab assistance payment in the amount of the subsidy the owner received for the unit under the public housing operating fund and the capital fund immediately prior to the effective date of the contract. Now, I don't know what NA means here. Maybe they don't have that problem in this unit because there was no substantial rehab. Okay, so, but if I had one, I'd be getting payments. It would be listing me additional payments during that period. Okay, just actually coming because I'm in the rehab period. Vacancies during rent up. The owner is entitled to housing assistance payment in the amount of 80% of the contract rent for a unit for a vacancy period not exceeding 60 days from the effective date of the contract, provided the owner commenced marketing, has taken, and continues to take all feasible steps. So they get vacancy periods, 80% of the rent during that rent up for 60 days of rent up. Vacancies after that. I get 80% for the first 60 days if the owner certifies it did not cause the vacancy. I notified the contract administrator of the vacancy or prospective vacancy for reasons and the reasons for it immediately upon learning of the vacancy. Has fulfilled and continues to fill requirements. Certifies that any eviction resulting in vacancy was carried out in compliance with 2-10. So this is a big problem most people don't understand. Is they get subsidy after that unit goes vacant. If they follow these rules, they get 80% of their subsidy for the next 2 months. Now, most multifamily projects fill the units quite fast. But the bottom line is, I know a lot of people who do not follow. This rule is a normal Section 8 rule, and they don't follow that. If vacancy is longer, the owner may apply to receive additional payments in amount equal to principal and interest payments required to amortize the portion of debt service attributable to the vacant unit for up to 12 additional months. So they get some protections in here that they need to be aware of. And I'm just guessing that owners don't really read these documents. Okay? So you are the one that's going to come back with the summary of all this and talks about, why. The contract administrator hasn't assumed any obligation for rent. Monthly requests are going to be handled through tracks. We know that. So they have requests and certifications, and we want to make sure we're honest. Maintenance and operations. Inspect the unit. Not decent, safe, and sanitary. Financial requirements. This is the one. Is this your highlight? Okay, great. Use of project funds. Okay, now, here we get a little different. These contracts are different than my normal HAP contracts because it says use of project funds. Project funds must be used for the benefit of the project, to make mortgage payments, to pay operating expenses, to make required deposits, to the replacement reserve in accordance with and to provide distributions to the owner. For the life of the contract, surplus cash may be distributed to the owner only at the end of each fiscal year, so they don't get mid-year calculations. Reserve for replacement. So I'm wondering, actually, if this gives me a cash receipts and disbursements requirement that I never had before. I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to compare it to some of my others, but I don't think most of my other HAP contracts say that specific language. Replacement reserves are okay. Rent adjustments, marketing and leasing, eligibility requirements. If you're less than 100% HAP, you've got to disperse them throughout the building. Utility allowance, incorrect payments, terminate tenancy. See, now the problem I have with this is PIH notice 2012-32, because now am I not following the 4350.3 guide? I'd have to read that notice to make sure I'm okay. Non-discrimination, 504, so reasonable accommodation, discrimination, flood insurance, liability insurance, disputes, interest of members, so my IOI information, assignment, can't do that. Defaults by the PHA, if the PHA is the CA and the owner. I think we're close to the end, and I don't see anything too more specific for us as auditors, do we? Why did I say I would or wouldn't? Because most of my HAP contracts, I said most of my HAP contracts do not contain language like that on project operations. Yeah, but not audit guide specific procedures for compliance. See, there's a difference. One is following the HUD audit guide. One is doing my testing as I feel I'm required to do. Okay, so we're going to talk about cash receipts and disbursements after the break anyway. Because I've held this out. We got our little break, so I held you a little longer now to keep our afternoon session, our next session, a little shorter. Yeah, it's almost 10:30. So that language, I think, probably puts me in cash receipts or cash receipts and disbursements testing. Where my other HAP contracts don't include similar language and don't give me that right, or don't give HUD the right to dictate that. I'd have to look at them to compare. No. If I'm on a Section 8 project and I don't have that requirement, and that's my only comment, that's my only program. That's a major Section 8 project, and it says nothing about managing those two paragraphs about project operations. It typically says deposit your money deposit the HAP receipts into a federally insured depository. That's about what it says. So from that, we don't get any requirements for HUD to dictate to us operating procedures. So cash receipts and disbursements, I may test because the audit requires it. But the audit guide compliance requirements of actually complying with the guide, I'm not required to do. See what I mean? You're going, yeah, but I'm not sure.
We don't have a lot of Section 8 only deals. It's those that you need to look at the agreement and figure out if we have to do it or not. But
Yeah.
We don't have many of those.
What is this one? This client? Section 8 only? Okay, so it doesn't have a regulatory agreement. It will be one of these new unique things where you don't have a loan on them at the same time with a regulatory agreement, right? This will become one of the few that doesn't also have a loan associated with it.
But that last
So that's disturbing. But, you know.
Which
Okay, so what else? Or we could talk about. I'm looking at you. I'm probably talking a lot to you.
So you're probably going to have to change your financial, right? Because you didn't have HUD supplementals in the back of last year's financial. Yeah, you're going to have to change it to now include like HUD supplementals and crap. You still have to include it for the owner certified statement. So you got to get set up in React so the client can submit it to React. And I can help you with that.
Yeah, he can do that. I mean,
Let's talk.
okay. So it is going to be different than what you expected. And, you know, I'm guessing that Frank's initial impressions were based on what client told him, right? And I don't know that client, with a lot of things, client doesn't really understand the depth of the problem. Okay, break time, 10 minutes. Sorry. You guys would really need me to do that, but in this case, this guy, last Friday, he sent it to me. Well, okay, so let's take a look at this. You've got all 4 pages. There are, let me pull it up on the screen here. That's not the one. So here's the report. I'm going to try to squeeze it down just a little bit. You can try to divine what it says at the little size you have. Now, you'll notice on this report that people are listed twice. And then if you look over at the column E, you'll see this 2-letter designation, AR, IR, MI. That tells us that the action that last occurred was an annual recertification. An MI is a move-in. An IR is an interim recertification. So something triggered and they came in with an income change or a deduction change or EIV or whatever had triggered that change. So, by the way, the Social Security number should be the same for each person, but I just added a number up and had it pulled down, so don't get too caught up in the Social Security numbers. I thought that came up yesterday, didn't it? So I just faked the Social Security. I got rid of all the original Social Security numbers. But now, you'll ask me, why are there 2 annual recertifications and there's a code thing here, 1 and 2 and 3? If you'll just look to the right, what you will see on column R here, let me just pound this up. What we saw going on here were changes in the utility allowance. That's why the other one shows there's 2 annual recertifications. As part of the recertification, they changed the utility allowance, or the utility allowance changed 2 months after they got done, but they didn't really. That's not determined to be an interim recertification, so they coded it as annual recertification. And the only change was utility allowance. If you scroll down a little further, you'll see some of them, in the $25 range. So that's what those mean. First of all, I just want everybody to be, familiar enough with the report to know what's on here. Okay, now the next thing that you might be interested in, we get the recertification dates, and then we have, the sad thing is this didn't come out with a header on it. This is the TRAX calculation of the subsidy. Column J. The next column, K, is the client's calculation of the subsidy from their system. Now, the one thing you should know about this is the HUD audit guide. We'll go back to the guide here in a second to talk about a couple things. The audit guide asks you to recompute this stuff. The answer to that is it's irrelevant. HUD recomputes it. The control in place is that HUD actually recalculates everything. This report shows you the recalculation independent of the client system. So the only thing that matters now is, did the client use the right data in the tenant file? And the next column over, L, is the difference, which is all 0. And then the next column, M, is $312. That's the total tenant payment. I have this in the one I had differently. I don't know why this one didn't come out with those columns.
It's in there, but when you sorted it yesterday,
It put the moved. I somehow changed the header.
If you go over to our
Oh, so it's on page.
third page.
Oh, so that's why I screwed it up. I was trying to grab it in reverse, so you can see the header on page 3. I didn't know that, so I apologize. What I sorted it for yesterday, though. So here's the thing. Next thing I have is the client income. The next thing is adjusted income. Okay? Now, I added in my own column here to subtract adjusted income from income. And what do I find in most of these? The adjustments. Well, what do you guess 480 is an adjustment for? Does anyone know? 480 is a personal exemption. Everybody gets 480 per person. So this tells me this single person living in the unit, the only adjustment they have is their personal exemption. The next one, 960, the next two, well, that's the next client or tenant. 2 people are living in the unit. 1440. Oh, now we have, it's 3 people in the unit. Now, I could go down that list. And I'm looking now for risk items that are beyond, adjustments that are beyond this calculation. Here's one at 880. That is not 2 personal exemptions. That's 1 personal exemption and $400 of something else. So when I go to the tenant file, what am I looking for? $400 of deductions. And I probably will add a column to just distinguish those out. Here I have $400. I don't know why 400 is in place. That one is a bit confusing to me. To me that one sticks out like a red thumb. That might be a tenant file I'm going to audit. Because I'm not sure. What's that? Yeah, so I'm not sure whether that was the old, I'm not sure why that is. Now here I have one, 6120. So I have a big medical thing, probably. So this gives you, when you look at this data, it gives you the opportunity to sort of risk assess your files. And you can plan a test to say, okay, most of these aren't going to have too much in here, but 1, 2, 3, this tenant file has this deduction. But when you go there, you know exactly what you're looking for. Now, the next thing I do with this spreadsheet, by the way, so here we are. This spreadsheet is my entire test, or the documentation of how I start my entire test for tenant files. I come down to the bottom that I screwed up here. Now here I get my MIs. These are my move-ins. So I only had 5 move-ins, right? Is that what? Oh, sorry. The first one's not a move-in. I think that's 5 move-ins. 5, yeah. So 5 move-ins. At this point, I know how many I have to test of those. The minimum I have to test is 1, right? And if I want to go to 2, I could do 2. And on those 5, I will add the columns out to the side of looked at the application, looked at verified Social Security, whatever. All the testing that's required, I'll just put a column out there, check mark, check mark, check mark. Now, when I look at income, when I go into that file, I only look for one number. I'm looking for that 21606 number in the file. So when I go there, I'm very targeted. I'm looking for the EIV reports, right? That's what I hope to find. The EIV report that verifies within within $2,400 that amount is right. Now, Justin knows, I think Tim knows, you don't have to test some dollar amount. If the EIV is within $2,400 or $200 a month, this test is over. That's it. EIV stops. That's verification of the income, correct? So we stop at that level. We want to make sure you all stop. And then, of course, I move to the deductions, which in this case is on that one is $2,400. Okay, I need to figure out why that's $2,400. I look for that number. Now, the EIV reports to us, key thing, right? One of the key tests. The key to that is if they don't match, they better have the supporting document, the other third-party documentation with or attached to that report, because they have to resolve it. So it should be right there. You shouldn't have to be going. Because the one thing we find with this kind of testing, and I know it from experience, and I probably told the story before, my own experience with this is pretty pathetic. I think it evolved into testing, looking for salacious details. We became bored. They were actually insurance files. So we just started looking at the pictures. So by about the 3rd hour, we were just trying to see who could get the worst picture, and we were running bets on it. Yeah, somebody won too. Trust me. I paid up happily and left immediately. So the picture was kind of gruesome. So I know what surgeries I will not have in the future, because the chance of going wrong, if they wrap that too tight and it turns black and gangrenous, it's not a pretty sight. So no pumps, no implant. So anyway, we just know that whenever I talk to staff, it's like, I look through what's most interesting about tenant files. Well, all the crap you read in them. We don't want to read those tenant files, really. We don't want to be looking at that stuff. What's that? You just get rid of it. You say, look, I'm focused. $12,128 is my income. Yes. $400 is deduction. Yes. Good. I'm off to the races, and I'm good to go. So the key thing for all this is to minimize time in the file by knowing the targeted data. Now, what the next thing you get out of this is this should be the mirror image of the 5.9. But if it's not, you'd have a big problem, because the 5.9 is now wrong, because this is what HUD's paying on in the system. Now, if it wasn't, I should have had an interim recertification, right? The items just above were all interim recertifications. So the best thing to do here is, the first thing I do is I sort the MIs, the move-ins, then I take them out. Then I resort it back, and I resort by the name, and then I group them together as the tenant files, because I know how many I'm going to do. There's 80 units in this project, so the total sample, I think I said yesterday, might be, with 5 move-ins, it's probably 85, because I had 5 move-outs, if I'm occupied. So the total test is 9. And you just use this report to weed through quickly the issues. Client will give you this report happily. They have no issues running this report. If I were to compare this, and I just come out to the side, and what I will do tonight on the plane when I work on this, I'll just come out and add some columns for the key testing issues, right? and the spreadsheet's built. I'm not wasting time developing this massive, beautiful spreadsheet showing you my great skills. Save those for another day. Save those for reporting. I don't know. But it downloads into this format. It's instantaneous. You get it. You add the columns. You make some calculations. You do a sort. You go to the tenant files. For most of it, you're looking for 4 pieces of information. And you already know what the numbers are you're targeting. So if it doesn't match immediately, and you don't have a reconciliation, oops, non-compliance, right? And you move on. So it keeps us really focused, and I think in a lot of cases, how long should that take? What's that? 9 files, this data, that format. Ed's going to say that he would be disappointed if it took more than 2 hours. Well, yeah, I knew you'd probably say an hour. So I didn't want to make you look bad. Because I'm going, I should be able to do that pretty fast. Once those files are on my desk, I should be able to do that really fast. And I'm not wasting time creating all this stuff. The one I had in Alabama, if I showed you that, Ed would probably go, oh, that's a lot. It's beautiful. And I asked him, what are you doing? Right? Well, we just decided to do this, and everything was hand-keyed, everything was done. I don't key a thing in here, right? I just get the report, sort it, add a few calculations, add some columns at the back, bang, fill out the tick marks for the testing, we're done. This project probably should have taken 1 real hour of testing, unless I ran into a problem. But then I know what's going to be the cause of that. It's easy to see because it didn't come out automatically. So now here's the problem in the HUD audit guide. So you have the report. It's easy, tracks assistant payment report. Client knows how to run this within 5 seconds. They don't have any problem. I might get the other one to tell me how many units were there, and I might also ask them to run the other one, just because it gives me the voucher payments, and it's all confirmed. It's like a confirmation. But this one is the key because it comes in its own spreadsheet. You only add some columns out to the side. You have 100% visibility of the tenants, and it's kind of like downloading the ledger, right, and looking through the ledger. I look through these guys. I can say, look, that one's why didn't we test that one that had $6,000 of deductions? Well, because I thought that would be hard to verify. But you would know. I chose something that was $480 and I didn't have to worry about it because I know it's the personal deduction. I can assume about anything that happens there, but it's very simple, very easy, and just as quick as possible to do. Now the problem, and I don't think this is a problem for you, the problem I have in general is related to the HUD audit guide. Because the guide still calls for all this, and I don't think you deal with that the way the guide says it, so that's good. But if I came out of this at the end of the day, I'm going to select a sample of tenant files. I would probably start this with, obtain the tracks, assistance, payment. I can't even type, so this has got to be bad. So I would start with that, and then from that select my sample, some recently admitted, some tenants who no longer reside. I'm going to get rid of this wait list test up here. Right? This in red. I didn't delete it automatically. I just put it in red because some people disagree with me. You have the choice of how you perceive this test. Now, for her on her RAD, if I have that RAD program, I probably still have to leave this in, don't I? That's a choice. You'll have to decide that. But for most of my HAP contracts, I do not think it tells me I have to maintain a wait list. I'm not sure I've ever seen that. So we don't want to get too involved, in the fair housing thing. And then the rest of this we would segregate out into things that are happening by recert or happening by move-in, and we just restructured in that manner. And it would get done in an hour, hour and a half, and you would probably have good visibility onto that about what really happened in the files. And the evidence to me is extremely compelling because it comes straight from HUD. So you might not know that. You may be suspicious that they have manipulated it, but when you go on site or something, you might do a procedure to make sure they gave you the real report, right? Or you actually, when you look at their 5.9s to see that they're signed, the data in the 5.9 in the file matches the data here. And that would be your verification that you had essentially the right stuff. Now, this ties it in because it also carries a big risk assessment away from me because I've already got all this independently from HUD. I don't have to recompute rent. I don't have to recompute anything because HUD calculates it for me. And I have this big control that I've never called a control before because data gets uploaded to HUD. Think about the controls. What's your control right now on tenant files? Anyone have a control ever identified over the tenant file testing process? It's Friday, Les. You're an idiot if you think I'm going to answer. Well, that's my point. It's Friday. I don't know why I asked that question. It's sort of it's a designed non-response question, so I can roll my eyes. Look, the control is regional manager. So somebody at the central office goes out and reviews tenant files. Almost all management companies have a secondary review of their tenant files. So that's the first control, right? Somebody from the management side reviews tenant files, and they maintain documentation of that review in the actual file. So when you pick up a file, the first thing you're looking for is documentation of the internal review. That's control 1. Now control 2 is about calculations. The control is what? HUD recalculates. It's right in tracks. So that basically covers me on at least 2 controls. So I've had somebody come back and re-verify data in the file, and I've had calculations re-verified by HUD independently, which they confirmed to me. Now, do I need another control? I don't really know the answer to that. It may revolve around EIV reports, security interests, resolving problems with EIV, whatever. But 2 or 3 controls is going to satisfy most of the peer review kind of requirements to identify and test controls. And that documentation sits right in that report. So it makes it very, very simple for us to come back to that and give us something to hold on to. And it's all in the most compact, easy to access package known to man. Okay? And it doesn't involve me developing this big, big, big butt-kicking spreadsheet that looks just fantastic. I had one here. I should have probably just opened it up to see what they were seeing. But I'll bet you could go to your own work papers, open it up, and see spreadsheets put together by people. You have to manually enter all the data, put all the columns in. Here I don't enter any data. I add some columns in to get my tick marks in place, and I'm done. So it's much simpler. So I hope that helps a little bit in terms of modifying that report. Now the next thing is my biggest problem in the audit guide. In fact, let's just go back through the audit guide from the top down. This audit guide is in section 8 of your book. So you have a copy of it. It doesn't have all these adjustments that I've made, but it is in the book. So from a testing perspective, or a change, things we want to change. Well, I don't think I have anything really to say about federal financial reports. It's just if you have them, you test it. The test is simple. You verify the data, and there's nothing really to modify there. Fair housing we took out. We took that out last year. You guys are happy with that change? And of course, the only thing I did was move the TSP or the tenant selection plan to tenant file testing below. And we're going to have a change this year, updated for the notices on VAWA. And of course, I should be able to see, the other control is the fact that they've listed their procedures in the tenant selection plan. They have a list of operating procedures in the plan. So did they adhere to that? So one of the controls is a written set of procedures that keep them in compliance with HUD, and you're testing to see that it's up to date. Mortgage, no problems. Replacement reserve, no big issues unless what? Unless I'm a mark-to-market client and MBI is still jacking me around. So I don't, actually I heard the other day, and I haven't received this document yet, that Holland and Hart originally had a letter that came out and challenged HUD on their ability to do this MBI test. And I was just checking to see if it came in yesterday. And he said that the Holland and Hart had actually won a case against HUD and MBI for doing the analysis. And I wanted to make sure I just was checking last night's email to see if he sent it last night, just real quick. And I don't see it here. I'll have to remind him again. But if that comes out, if I have that, I'll let you know. So everybody may not have to do this. I'll send that to Jan as soon as I find out. So other than that, the audit guide is fine for reserves unless you have an MBI problem. Residual receipts, again, no problem unless you're being accosted and having your residual receipts pulled away. So that's okay. So we get down to cash receipts, and here's my most disliked section. So the guide tells us to get an understanding of the agent's procedures for handling cash receipts. That's fine. Determine whether the procedures for receiving and depositing funds are in accordance with the handbook 4370.2. Well, look, that's mostly what? Depositing in a timely fashion. That is not the client's problem anymore, and it's not the control to really be testing. So I don't know what to say about that guide. I can say, great, they've done it. But let's get down to the actual sample. Okay, select a sample from the receipts ledger. Determine they were made timely. Test supporting documentation. They were received properly, counted for. All deposits are in agreement with the bank statement. What does this test do for us, obviously? It tests to see that things that were here were recorded correctly. It doesn't ask me to test for things that are not there. So I have a problem with this from a completeness side. It doesn't actually achieve those requirements. Now, what I think most people do can be summarized here. This isn't in the book, but I'll put it on the screen. What most people do is they come and get their general ledger, and I've split out the general ledger for the items of the cash account. This is a housing authority, but the concept is exactly the same. And I said the total debits to the ledger were $510,000, and then I went up and summarized the key things out of it. So HUD subsidy was $342, allocations were 12, tenant payments were $152,950, and I've accounted for $507,758. So I'm short about what? $2,500, $2,400. Okay, so I know where the cash came from, right? I know how the cash was deposited because I see the 12 deposits for each of the subsidy items, and I summarized the tenant ledger. I went over to revenue and see that I billed $151,833. Okay. And I recorded $152,950, so I expect actually receivables to have dropped almost $1,100. In fact, receivables were less than $2,000 in either case, no matter what. And then I went out and I applied the gross potential rent test, units times the rate, right? And I came back adding up these numbers, the $495, and on this housing authority, I was within like $7,000 of gross potential rent. Now, do I know that that's reasonable or not? Well, I know that she had about 16 unit months of vacancy, one essentially unit per month. Well, that's about right looking at the rents. And by the way, now we've already compared this cash to the bank reconciliations, which were done. So what really has happened at this stage in less than 5 or 10 minutes to actually sort the data, mine the data? I'm seriously less than 15 minutes. I've accounted for a couple of facts. All the cash that technically could be billed through the revenue account through rent is basically here. And most of it's come into the bank statement. Or because I've reconciled this, the bank statements do agree to here, and I probably tested the two, June and December, conveniently accessing both my surplus cash calculations. Now, if I've done all that, I've already done this test. And most people do this at some level. And so I ask you, what's left? Now, 80% of the people tell me, quite frankly, they just go sample according to the HUD audit guide. And I say, with the intention of what? And they say, complying with the guide. Hallelujah, right? Hallelujah. That makes me very happy that we complied with the guide. But 315 yesterday told me I should be looking at the client's system of indicating risk. And the client's risk in these cases is always around vacancy, bad debt. Now, if the client has actual collection problems, they'll identify that too. So in my mind, what's left is a test of the controls. I've substantively met all these requirements. This little test of the HUD audit guide to get there doesn't do anything additional for me to come to my conclusion except say I complied with the guide. Chapter 3. I think I've complied with the concepts of the guide here, and what I would do now, what I would much prefer to do, is go identify how the client mitigated its risk. Those are the controls. Let's go test that process. How do I know you're vacant? How do I collect bad debt? Who approves the write-offs? Who does this? Who does that? Those things, based on our 315 analysis, are more important to us than what the audit guide is actually asking you to test. Because 25, 30 years ago, the way the guide's written, and those procedures come from the handbook says, well, don't leave any cash on the site. Well, I don't think your clients have that problem anymore. They've got technological solutions that pretty much wipe the slate clean on that. So what I'm more interested in is how they develop their vacancy analysis. How do they monitor the vacancies? If they have vacancies, what do they do about it? Right? What's the control over that? Is somebody walking the site? Is somebody doing this? So what we've seen with the clients, one guy, he actually, the CFO, sits at his desk and he has the project. He has 4 monitors on his desk. He's kind of a psycho. Okay? I said 2's enough for anybody, right? Well, okay, now another psycho. But you have it for different reasons. You're really psycho. You're a tech person, so gosh. I don't know. I can't have enough till I have 10. And they're all, what? Extra wide ones?
Rotate.
Yeah, rotate them. Anyway, he has this monitor on here, runs a specific program, and he watches the projects every day on vacancy. If you're in the top 10 and you go red, he picks up the phone and he says, calls the regional manager. I want you to walk the site, that site, this site, that site. And I want to report on the walk before the end of the day. Okay, so she sends her stuff in. That's the control. He has this great control. So does the system correctly calculate it? I might have to decide that. But she's walking the sites. Somebody independent of the site manager is walking the sites. And that's what's important. I mean, I did hotels before. I did a Stein Erikson Lodge in Deer Valley. Beautiful place. Owners own these condos and rent them out through the rental program. What's the risk for the owners? Some little jackwagon of the night auditor is letting people come in and stay for free because they're his buddies and they're paying him under the table. It happens quite frequently. If you can have a condo with 2 or 3 hot tubs in it, you can have a pretty dang good party in the summer because there's not that much occupancy. So they instituted controls to catch that. It finally went down to laundry. So that's how they caught them. But my point is, those are the controls that are important in this day and age, not maybe what the HUD audit guide says is important. And I don't mind walking from that, so I make this suggestion to you, knowing a lot of people are skittish about it, but if I could rewrite the guide today, that's how I would rewrite it. Do that test, substantive procedures, then go identify the controls the client has, but because I leave it open-ended, people want to say, what are the controls? What? It's kind of like, look, you guys know I'm from Utah, so what do you think of when you think of Utah? Okay, there's the real answer. Mormons. Okay, skiing's a close second, but Mormons usually comes up first. So, as a Mormon, I can make some observations about my religion and about religion in general. I've watched I have a lot of Jewish firms in December. So after Vegas, I go to do Jewish firms during Christmas because they don't like Christmas. Christmas time is a time for education. So I go out and I do the Jewish firms, and we're really good friends. I said, don't worry about, I don't have payas, and I don't wear a hat and a black suit, which is mostly just evolved tradition. But I said, I do understand weird religion type things. So I said, here's how this evolves in my mind. Auditors are it's all about human nature. I use religion as the starting point, though, because everybody sort of understands it. In the beginning, God said what? How many commandments were there? There's only 2 that really mattered. That's what it was in the beginning to Adam and Eve. Of course, don't eat the fruit of that bad tree. But love God and love your neighbor like yourself, right? That was the gist of this message. Well, it wasn't very long before Justin started ticking me off. His dog pooped in my yard a lot. And I'm going, I don't think I love Justin anymore. So do I really need to love Justin if his dog poops in my yard? Well, pretty soon the people are clamoring and God says, oh, you people are idiots. So let's times the commandments by 5 and you get 10. Well, of course, that was immediately rejected in favor of the calf theory, right? Well, anyway, the Jews now, that evolved into what? 613 commandments. And I tell my Jewish friends, you're lucky. You know how many there are. There's 613. Mine evolve almost daily by how my neighbors treat me. He's drinking a Coke. He's evil. That's a rule I didn't know, right? I'm a pretty good student of my religion. That Coke thing is not a rule. It's a made-up piece of crap somebody dreamed up to think about being better than someone else. So we evolve into this where we don't ever have enough guidance till somebody actually tells us exactly. Now stand up, sit down, turn around, scratch your butt, whatever. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I was going to say something else, and butt came out. Is it Friday? Look, I've been on the road for about 16 and a half weeks. So I'm a little goofy right now. But you see how this goes. The audit guy's just like that. Because somebody couldn't decide how much is enough. Where's my job? I'm scared that someone won't like me because I made this choice. So somebody writes down a bunch of more rules. Oh, I feel so much better. I cling to them. But then we can't update the rules fast enough to keep up with technology. And then somebody like me comes along and says, this is the stupidest thing on the planet. Read the agreement, right? What's your requirements? Well, I can't, because God told me to keep George. So, that comes out of you is this.